Hello, hello. Hello! It is Storytime with Uncle Scotty. I am Uncle Scotty, your host for Storytime with Uncle Scotty. Hydration is important. See that water come out? Magic tricks. And Storytime. Thank you to Time, our sponsor. What is Storytime without time? Storytime. Uncle Scotty. More confusing, less fun. Thank you to everyone who's been watching so far as we go through this new book, Mr. Popper's Penguins. Now, so far, some exciting things have happened. Mr. Popper is a painter in Stillwater, loves the Arctic and the Antarctic, the North Pole and the South Pole. This is very concerning to his wife, who just wants him to have a regular job, not lays around the house all the time when he's not working, reading these books about these expeditions. Mr. Popper is a dreamer. Mrs. Popper, more of a doer, seems so far. Anyhow, these two things can coexist. Being someone steeped in reality and being someone steeped in dreams and idealism. Anyhow, that's a lesson for another day, but we have found out that Mr. Popper wrote a letter to the Drake expedition, which, as we covered last time, doesn't seem to be the rapper Drake, but a different Drake. I think Sir Francis Drake, but also I'm recalling now maybe Sir Francis Drake was of a different time, and this is a third Drake of history. This is really exciting for me, learning about all these Drakes around the world. Anyhow, Mr. Popper turned on the radio last night. Sir Francis Drake from the South Pole, on the radio said, "Hello, Mr. Popper, you have a surprise coming your way." This famous person was like, "Mr. Popper, you have a surprise coming your way." And they're like, "Whoa." Mrs. Popper was like, "Whoa." And now they're going to find out what the surprise is. Sometime, hopefully today. Let's get to it. Chapter 3, Out of the Antarctic. What with the excitement of having the great Admiral Drake speak to him over the radio, and his curiosity about the Admiral's message to him, Mr. Popper did not sleep very well that night. He did not see how he possibly could wait to find out what the Admiral meant. When morning came, he was almost sorry that he had nowhere to go, no houses to paint, no rooms to paper. It would have helped him to pass the time. "Would you like to have the living room papered over?" he asked Mrs. Popper. "I have quite a lot of paper number 88 left over from the mayor's house." "I would not," Mrs. Popper said firmly. "The paper on now is plenty good enough. I am going to the first meeting of the Ladies' Aid and Missionary Society today, and I don't want any mess around to clean up when I get home." "Very well, my love," Mr. Popper said meekly, and he settled down with his pipe, his globe, and his book of Antarctic adventures. But somehow, as he read today, he could not keep his mind on the printed words. His thoughts kept straying away to Admiral Drake. What could he have meant by a surprise for Mr. Popper? Fortunately, for his peace of mind, he did not have very long to wait. That afternoon, while Mrs. Popper was still away at her meeting, and Janie and Bill had not yet come home from school, there was a loud ring, 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 at the front door. "I suppose it's just the postman. I won't bother to answer it," he said to himself. The bell rang again, a little louder this time. Ring, ring, ring. Grumbling to himself, Mr. Popper went to the door. It was not the postman who stood there. It was an expressman with the largest box Mr. Popper had ever seen. "Party by the name of Popper live here?" "That's me." "Well, here's a package that's come air express all the way from Antarctica. Some journey, I'll say." Mr. Popper signed the receipt, Mr. Popper, and examined the box. It was covered all over with markings. "Unpack at once," one said. "Keep cool," said another. It's a good hint. "Keep cool," said another. He noticed that the box was punched up here and there with air holes. You can imagine that once he had the box inside the house, Mr. Popper lost no time in getting the screwdriver, for by this time, of course, he had guessed that the surprise was from Admiral Drake. He had succeeded in removing the outer boards and part of the packing, which was a layer of dry ice, when the depths of the from when the depths of the packing case he suddenly heard a faint ork. His heart stood still. Surely he had heard that sound before at the Drake Expedition movies. His hands were trembling so that he could scarcely lift the last of the wrappings. There was not the slightest doubt about it. It was a penguin. Mr. Popper was speechless with delight. But the penguin was not speechless. Ork, it said again. And this time it held out its flippers and jumped over the packing debris. It was a stout little fellow, kind of short, about 2.5 feet high. Although it was about the size of a small child, it looked much more like a gentleman, with its smooth white waistcoat, like a vest, in front, and its long black tailcoat trailing behind. Its eyes were set in 2 white circles on its black head. It turned its head from one side to the other. At first with one eye, and then with the other, it examined Mr. Popper. Mr. Popper had read that penguins are extremely curious, and soon he found out this was true, for stepping out, the visitor had begun to inspect the house. Down the hall it went, and into the bedrooms, with its strange, pompous little strut. When it, or he, Mr. Popper had already begun to think of it as a he, got to the bathroom, it looked around with a pleased expression on its face. Pleased penguin. And here we can see Mr. Popper and a penguin and a sign that says, "Keep cool, no matter what, at all times, keep cool." "Perhaps," said Mr. Popper, "all that white tiling reminds him of the ice and snow at the South Pole. Poor thing, maybe he's thirsty." Carefully, Mr. Popper began to fill the bathtub with cold water. This was a little difficult because the inquisitive bird kept reaching over and trying to bite the faucets with its sharp red beak. Finally, however, he succeeded in getting the tub all filled. Since the penguin kept looking over, Mr. Popper picked it up and dropped him in. The penguin seemed not to mind. "Anyway, you're not shy," said Mr. Popper. "I guess you've got sort of used to playing around with those explorers at the pole." When he thought the penguin had had enough of a bath, he drew out the stopper. Mr. Popper drew out the stopper. He was just wondering what to do next when Janie and Bill burst in from school. "Papa!" they shouted together at the bathroom door. "What is it?" "It's a South Pole penguin sent to me by Admiral Drake." "Look," said Bill, "it's marching." The delighted penguin was indeed marching. With pleased little nods of his handsome black head, he was parading up and down inside the bathtub. Sometimes he seemed to be counting the steps it took. 6 steps for length, 2 steps for width, 6 steps for length again, 2 steps more for width. "For such a big bird, he takes awfully small steps," said Bill. "And look how his little black coat drags behind. It almost looks like it was too big for him," said Janie. But the penguin was tired of marching. This time, when it got to the end of the tub, it decided to jump up the slippery curve. Then it turned with outstretched flippers, tobogganed down on its white stomach. Remember from James and the Giant Peach? A toboggan is a sled. Tobogganed down on its white stomach. They could see those flippers, which were black on the outside, like the sleeves of a tailcoat, were white underneath. "Gook, gook," said the penguin, trying its new game again and again. "What's its name, Papa?" asked Janie. "Gook, gook," said the penguin, sliding down once more on its glossy white stomach. "It sounds something like cook," said Mr. Popper. "Why, that's it, of course. We'll call him Cook. Captain Cook." And we will learn more about Captain Cook and Mr. Popper and Mrs. Popper and Bill and Janie and all the puppers and their stoppers next time on Storytime with Uncle Scotty. I've been your host, Uncle Scotty. We have our own mugs. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for checking us out on Patreon. And I am excited to see you next time.